Welcome to Confluently, where we explore the intersection of truth, resilience, connections that empower you to embrace your discomfort and chase your most ambitious dreams with courage. In the coming episodes, you'll hear from top experts sharing personal stories of insight, strategies for overcoming obstacles, redefining success, and breaking through barriers. Today, we explore the world at your doorstep, a conversation with Stuart Greif on global hospitality and innovation. I'm Tiffany Hart, your host. From growing up in the suburbs of LA as a biracial girl on government assistance with a learning disability and a lesbian single mom, to being the first college graduate to stand at the podium of Harvard, to navigate a diverse career path from nonprofit engagement of Fortune 500 companies to multi-million-dollar real estate and entrepreneur. I've seen firsthand how dreams that seem unreachable can be realized with the support and determination. Thanks to the many who have lifted me up, my journey has taught me valuable lessons about perseverance. At Confluently, we celebrate and extend that legacy of support and resilience. My guest today, again, with no need for an introduction, is Stuart Greif, Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy and Innovation and Operating Officer of Forbes Travel. Stuart is well known in the business as a champion of innovation, AI, and integrating strong advocacy for DE&I initiatives. Stuart, thank you so much for joining us.
Tiffany, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. And it's humbling with all you've overcome in your life. I'm a bit chagrined to admit, the hardest thing for me was English was my second language, which surprises most people. And then I tell them I'm from New Jersey, and they get it. So, but kidding aside, it really is. And I really appreciate what you're doing and bringing just kind of real conversations in a way I think that it isn't out there in the business world, but is very much needed. Absolutely.
Unfortunately, life is a journey that intersects with lifing, honestly. As I mentioned earlier, my dream as a young girl was to attend Harvard and travel the world. And for those of you out there who don't know, can you share a little bit more about what some of your early dreams were?
Yeah, it was probably to be a policeman or fireman. And then I think a lot of us, as you get older, you start thinking about the world differently. And the wonderful thing at this age and stage of life is I've come back, I think, more full circle to you grow up, you go to school, you get on a track, you have everyone else's expectations. Chip Conley of the Modern Elder Academy, who's a huge inspiration to me and somebody that I've looked up to in the industry for a long time, as well as broadly, talks a lot about this U-shaped curve of happiness. But, there's a certain stage of life. Maybe it's you stop, giving a SHIT about those things.
You can fully curse here.
Yeah.
This is that podcast. Yeah.
I was going to ask permission instead of beg forgiveness. I know we talked before, but yeah, where you're out of F's to give, right? Where you're like, you know what, this is who I am and what I want. And some people have always kind of stayed true. I think people that are like, they always know they were an artist, or somebody that always knew that, their path was finance, and they have this huge passion that's a singularity. Most of the people I know and folks, maybe it sounds like you have such a multiplicity of interests and backgrounds, and there's not a singularity. And so I think, over time in your career and life, being able to figure out what you don't like, learn more about what you do, and get that greater alignment of what's in your heart and your passion and purpose really makes a big difference. So for me, that's one of the things that I hope, to be able to give back at this stage with others and share. That road is rocky. It's hard. There are times it's depressing and uncertain, anxiety provoking, and you have everything from finance to the personal side. You go through different relationships and so forth. But I find as I've gotten older, the nectar is in the little things in life, the everyday, the human connection, and being able to laugh at yourself and like what we're doing. I'm so passionate about what we do in hospitality and Forbes Travel Guide. We're not curing cancer. Like, it's okay. Like, keeping perspective, and especially for the younger folks in our team, and being able to learn from failure and being able to celebrate, little victories and have fun while we're doing it.
Absolutely. My career has clearly been a random walk, as we like to say, as well as my education was literally through the back door. So, with thinking about that, actually, how did your experiences growing up and your education really kind of influence your career? Was there any profound teachers or moments?
Yeah, I think it how I grew up not only influenced my career, but as a human being and what I carry forward. So I grew up kind of a mix of blue collar, white collar neighborhood. My mom was a special ed teacher, which usually meant she had kids who came from really tough environments. She didn't really have as much kids that had really, hardcore developmental or kids that had more pronounced, more medical conditions. And that was always hard because she went back to an environment and tried to be kind of that spark. She said, my secret was I was always a little crazier than they were. And I said, did you have to bring your work home, Mom? Come on. But she's got a great sense of humor. And my dad worked for a Japanese company, a couple companies, but in that generation, they kind of worked in the same companies for a long time. And he made a lot of sacrifices for us, but didn't always pursue things he was passionate about, maybe part out of fear. And anyone who has a mortgage, kids, or, college, understands that kind of perspective. And Walter Annenberg was, some people may know the Annenberg name, former ambassador to the court of St. James. He had a family publishing business, and in the 1920s, he was accepted into a high school that wasn't as elitist or prestigious as some others. And he was Jewish, so he couldn't get into some of the other schools. He always remembered that school called Petty, Peddie. And I was a local kid. I was a day student at Petty, but rose to become, by my senior year, like student body president, captain of the hockey team, co-captain of soccer, very involved. And I got to meet Mr. Annenberg, on a number of occasions. And he said, always respect the other fellow. And, the notion of giving back was the highest form of citizenship. And my parents had great values in terms of being humble, being down to earth. And I also, I saw very affluent kids who would go off on ski breaks, and I worked in an ironworks during the summer, and I washed dishes in a restaurant. And I was a spokesperson for, a video yearbook company. You worked in a chocolate factory, to the point where you don't want to eat chocolate because, you smell it all day, which is, I think, a great childhood tragedy. Also maybe how a parent may want to stop their kids from eating sweets. As the ironworks, I worked with Ed, who is a Vietnam vet. John was a volunteer fireman, and people that didn't have the same things. I spent a summer working at Herman Miller, putting, the cubicles that are felt lined. I've got a nickname for them, but that's a little too off color. That'll be over drinks sometime. But I was on the manufacturing line because it was the best pay I could get. And it reminds you how fortunate we are to have the education or the opportunities you fought and scraped, Tiffany, to achieve everything that you've done in the world. And I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I also wasn't born, with some of the true adversity and challenges and that others do in this country. I did live in Japan, which also influenced when you don't look like everybody else. I spent a summer on a scholarship there with a homestay. You start to understand how it feels to be different or an outsider, even though there are some ways that you may be treated special as an outsider, as a foreigner. And I knew that, I could always go back to my country. So being able to understand how somebody in this country, a person of color, women, others, where it is your own culture and country, and yet you still can feel that way, I think opened the aperture. And in college, I went to Wesleyan undergrad in Connecticut, which is a very diverse school. And I did that intentionally. My high school was it became very diverse later, but it didn't really stretch me in that way. And at Wesleyan, there, all kinds of people, including eclectic. There was a movie made about them called PCU, where somebody from town fired a gun into the ceiling at one of their parties, and they wanted to open. It was, should we have people from the community at our party? Should it be only school? And the head of eclectic wrote in the editorial of the newspaper, he's like, basically, if you don't want to party with us, like if you're not willing to die, we don't want to party with you. So a little bit of a kooky place, but I love Wesleyan. I love Wesleyan people. We're a rare breed, maybe.
Well, I also went to a liberal arts college for my undergrad. I went to the Claremont colleges. I'm a Pitzer alum. But the statement back then, and this is, many years ago, it was quite expensive. Clearly, I got in on a scholarship, was $50,000 a year and all the free beer you can drink. Like every floor got a liquor allowance to throw parties. And that's what we did. And there is nothing better than nerds partying. I just want to let you know that right now, because they party hard.
Who inspired you? You must have had people, in my case, it was my parents, it was Walter Annenberg, it was other people in the community. The high school I went to, Martin Luther King in the 60s spoke there. Like it had, even though it wasn't as diverse, it had this kind of openness. There were a lot of seminal things in those jobs being exposed in Japan. Like for you, what was that nucleus when you were younger?
That's a really great question. I think, interestingly, in life, mine wasn't about, I didn't see anybody who looked like me doing anything that I wanted to do. right? And that bothered me. And I, took a look around, my family, which is also extraordinarily blue collar. My mom and my grandparents, they all worked 7 days a week, from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. in a restaurant.
Yeah.
And, they really encouraged me. They're like, this is not the path for you, right? Like, you're smart, do something else. And so I think that they gave me the courage and the foundation to be the first in that room. And it's extraordinarily uncomfortable. Like most things, I have an interesting past. And my ex-husband at one point was like, why do you want to go into finance? Right? Like, there's not a lot of women that do that. And women of color, even less. Right? And he was like, why do you want to do something that's so difficult for you to achieve? And I said, why not? So I have to say, I'm kind of like that quote, which is, some see the, world as it is, and, they ask why, or look at the impossible and they ask, why. And I'm the one who looks at the impossible or improbable and say, why the hell not?
Yeah, I love that. Love that. There's that.
Going on to exploring about resilience and challenges in your career. In your early career, it was marked by roles largely in finance and business development. And you said, that doesn't really sound like a fireman or a policeman. What led you kind of to transition from that into the travel space? I know I'm assuming it has to do with your travels early on to college and stuff like that, but tell me more.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me, there is one other kind of part-time job. It's another one over drinks that's a little less savory as well, where it was, scraping. But in some ways, I think at every level, everyone in their life faces challenges, but certainly, looking the way I do, it's a lot easier in this. There are a lot of things that I don't face that you did, for example, or people of color. It's also why I spend a disproportionate amount of time outside of my day-to-day with female founders, for example, and startups, and supporting and advocating for diverse founders and others in the industry. And, when the data shows that the access to capital and resources is, level playing field, then I'll say, okay, maybe, level that out. But until then, it still is. But I think, like all of us, the way, somebody today, gets a big sales win and gets a bonus or something for the family. I think about a villager who, catches a giant fish to be able to feed his family or his community. Intrinsically, as a human being, that sense of, satisfaction, that sense of fulfillment of being able to be in service to others, is comparable. And so for me, we're all going to, in life, wherever you're starting, whatever you're doing, I think early on I had a partner at Accenture when it was Anderson Consulting, when, we sold the client something that clearly the client was even saying they didn't really need, and they had a big pain point over there we were well positioned to solve. And I literally had an associate partner, like I thought he was going to throw a chair at me. Luckily we had the manager in there mediating, saying, when I was asking and just questioning, like not in a accusatory way, right? But just, it seems like this is what they need. Sometimes, Stuart, it's okay to ask questions and challenge. Other times you need to just, shut up and do what you're told. And like, that was the day when I applied, to business school and was like, I'm out of here. That's not my values and cultures. And I think part of it too is, growing up, and it sounds like with your family too, everybody in this world is just trying to kind of, make things a little better for themselves and the people they care about, not in a selfish way or a zero-sum game that if I do that for me, that takes away from you, Tiffany. Yeah. But I remember, that was part of the lessons working with all kinds of people growing up. And when you see that, when I was an executive later at S&P Global at the time, the McGraw-Hill companies, Alfredo took out, my trash. I talked to him and treated him with the same respect that I did to Glenn, our segment CEO. And I treated Glenn as CEO, not on a pedestal, not disrespectful, and not in ways that don't recognize his role as the CEO. But I think it's just a way approaching life that I think, helped me at least see when I came across adversity, knowing that, like my mom would always say, like, how much money is enough to retire? And keep in mind, when I was a kid, it was a lot more years ago than when you were, Tiffany.
Not that many, for sure.
Like $100,000. She'd say, no, it'd be $500,000. She'd know, $1 million. And that was a lot more back in those days. She's like, no, it's always a little more than you have. If that's your measure, you're never going to be happy. There's always going to be people that have a lot more and a lot less than you. And I think, I grew up too, and this, some people may be able to relate to this, and I want to be like, this isn't a business conversation per se. Like, I had a father I love. He made so many sacrifices, but he grew up in that kind of mindset of kind of being a victim and fearful. And I understand why, with financial pressures and things like that. And it took me a long time. Luckily, my mother was very positive, kind of entrepreneurial type person. She later started her own jewelry business. She was a special ed teacher, but in the summer she had all different kinds. She did real estate for a while. She'd always kind of, and I've taken after her, but it took a long time to teach myself and work my way out of, when you get stressed and tired, the default was to kind of have that withdrawal and positive. Because what you said, nobody, along the same lines as far as why not, it's like nobody put anything new in this world coming from a place of no. And the possibilities, as I've learned later in life, is by opening up and being able to connect dots and meeting people and connecting as human beings. And then over time, those things will happen. But you have to have that orientation. You have to be willing to be open to the possibility. And you have to realize, we teach our kids two things. I probably teach them a lot of bad things, but don't tell their mom. But the first thing is, nobody, learns to ride a bicycle without falling off and scraping their knee, multiple times and hurting yourself. And the second is, nobody's responsible for you. Nobody owes you anything in this world. And we love you and we're going to support you and do, but you need to be able to go after the things that are important to you in life. And I think that notion of adversity, I use the example of a partner, that was one about like who you are and your values. But I've failed in every role that I've ever done in some format whenever I was doing anything. Like anybody that like learned Excel for the first time, or finance, or whatever skill that you're good at now. I started rock bouldering and climbing. I played hockey, soccer, lacrosse growing up. I was horrible at it when I started. And I'm like, I'm an athlete. Like what's wrong? And you have to go back. Chip Conley, who I referenced, talks about that kind of beginner mindset. And you have to open that with excitement and say, like, I realize I suck. One of the world's best sushi chefs, who was in LA, had the opportunity to eat there one night with my wife, a kind of special occasion type thing. And there was a young couple who asked the sushi chef, this guy's renowned, he had this little place, after everything he's done, this must be like the best sushi he's ever made. He said, no, come back tomorrow. Tomorrow's sushi, a little bit better. Come back day after that. Next day, sushi, a little bit better. And so I think it is this lifetime learning, this orientation, this notion of adversity, of what you learn from it. And we're all going to fuck up. See there, I dropped an F-bomb, right? I got it out. I got the first one.
Yes.
Right? So we're all going to fuck up in our personal lives and our professional. The question is, like, what do you do with that? Do you, when you calm down, do you apologize to your wife or spouse or partner or your kid when you're like, this is still important, but how I handled it was poorly and I'm sorry?
Yep.
At work, do you give credit to everybody else, but take responsibility for your team when something goes wrong? And I think it's not any one thing. It's that accumulation of falling off the bicycle and being willing and humble. And in my 20s, I was probably like many 20-year-olds. I was like, no fucking way. I'm like, it's that, right? This was over time. But the sooner you learn that, the sooner you're willing to be, vulnerable in a way, the sooner you're able to do that. And I think, people come into context and they're like, oh, everybody's an idiot, like, and I'll fix this, instead of like, wow, these people have been here a long time. They have a lot of insight and knowledge, and they've probably tried everything. I might have some things that together, maybe we can figure out a new path forward, right? But there's something, unfortunately, in our DNA that's very tribal, and I think it comes from a place of fear and anxiety, and it's a way that makes us feel good, right? It feels good to say, like, it's not me, because we don't have to get over that hurt and then own, as uncomfortable and hard as it is, being a beginner or doing something that's humbling or maybe embarrassing, or apologizing and owning. And I think one of the best things that a startup that's now a unicorn I was part of, called Amperity, Kabir, the CEO, did, is he normalized failure. And you talk about this, Tiffany. I love this. We would all at the stand-up share one success and one failure. And this failure wasn't stigmatized. It wasn't celebrated being like, hey, everybody go fuck up so the company can fail, right? Because that's no good. That doesn't work. But it was like, help us understand what happened and why. And let's all learn from that vicariously and apply that to our area. And let's also understand what we're doing, differently going forward. And it took out that fear of being able to confess about it or to bring it up because, especially at a startup, that you're a pirate ship. That's life and death. And you want everybody to say when things break to understand why. You need the leadership to understand why things are going off course so you can correct. And it should be true in larger organizations, but because of politics or how people are, it becomes harder. And the longer it goes, the harder it is. But as you get older, I think, not everybody, but the leaders I respect and the ones that I see most successful, and that's performance, but that's also how people look at them and the people they cultivate who follow after them, have this humility. And certainly in hospitality, there's this kind of service that I think keeps people much more grounded, which is why I love the industry so much.
That's absolutely fantastic. Building on what you said, my favorite piece of advice I got from a boss was, I want you to go out, fuck up, fess up, and then fix it. And he's like, the faster you do it in that particular order, the better you will get at what you do. And, that kind of really stuck with me as part of, my leadership. I don't care, that you break something. I mean, you're going to tell me about it so that we can fix it. And it's a learning experience. There's a statement that says, nobody's born knowing how to, lay down flat roofing. Okay. It's not inherent, from the womb. In fact, we have zero, inherited skills, as humans. Everything that we learn is through knowledge transfer and trial. I mean, many times I look at coffee beans and be like, who thought, let's take these, let's dry them out, let's grind them up, put them in some hot water, and then, consume them. But also, thinking about this concept of continuous learning that you mentioned, which is so, I think, important, right? One of the most important skill sets that you can have beyond integrity is curiosity. Right. And it's that curiosity that keeps you learning. And, the fear of failure creeps in at some point, right? I'm fairly certain if I were to go back to gymnastics now, from when I was younger, I would suck. I would still enjoy it though. People always want to do these hobbies or activities that they can post on Instagram about how great they've done. How about just having a hobby that you suck at? You're probably going to suck at it for the rest of your life, but you enjoy it. And even the failed things. I want to get back to a space where there's that creative outlet. Like when you were a kid and you made that, this is from a long time ago, and that plaster ashtray, and you brought, and it looked terrible. It looked like a piece of poop, that had been glazed, and you brought it home to your mom with such pride and joy, and she encouraged you that same way. I think how much more we could have as a society if we encouraged adults the same way that we encourage children.
Yeah.
Which is, you don't have it yet, but good job. Yeah. Keep going.
And some executive teams I've been a part of, it's being kind to treat them as children. It might be
absolutely
some animals, as we probably all experience. Yeah, when I was at Microsoft, I love the quote Sachi used to inspire folks by saying, "Be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. Be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all." There's far too much. Like none of us, even with these devices in our hands, and the ability even with ChatGPT to have the world's information. Information isn't knowledge. Knowledge isn't, distilled experience, which is ultimately, as Chip Conley has stated, wisdom, right? And others. And I think the degree to which somebody could spend, for example, their entire life in one function, in one industry, in one area, it could be pricing, or could be vendor management, or sales, right? And yet, the amount of knowledge that is so far beyond any one of us, is just infinitesimal, right? And so I feel that, there's a mindset with that we talked about, the humility of, asking questions, of learning, of understanding. As an executive at some point, one of the best CEOs I had the opportunity to work for in my, career had a very high question to statement ratio. So he didn't yes, you need to communicate consistently more than you need to over time when you have a vision, and getting everybody on board and kind of being able to do that. There's an element of that communication. But when it came to what's going on, when it came to understanding and drive solutions, it's there's a famous saying that answers change, but questions endure. And by being inquisitive, he could ask the questions that others might have quickly jumped or pattern recognized, or I think it's this, and they informed some of the questions, but it allowed him and everybody else around the room and invited them in to get the experts to then get like an hourglass, with sand to funnel to the point where there's enough information for that given risk profile of the decision to then drive it and then out to execution on the bottom side.
I've been on both sides of that particular, I guess, board table, right? So one is you're the person that's presenting the answers and you want to present in such a way that there are no questions at the end, God willing, because you're afraid that you're going to get torn apart. On the other end, I find that, if you're in the leadership and you're driving that those questions actually really do go ahead and fuel the solidification if it is the right answer. And if not, then it, like you said, it brings up, the margins of risk, right, on either side.
Yeah, I think too. I mean, one of the most powerful statements is, I don't know. I think as you get, to your point, as you get a little bit older, you realize that, imagine you're in a room. Now, obviously, you need to be expert about some things that are being asked. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have you in the room to begin with, right? So you have some foundation of wisdom or expertise or relevance. But somebody asks a question, say, I don't know, that's a really great question. Let me look into that and circle back and then follow up with diligence. Or, I don't know, that's a really great question. That's outside of my area of expertise, but let me connect you with Amanda over here, in our case, our independent president of standards and ratings, who I'm sure would love to be able and expertly could address that for you. So I think there's in startups sometimes fake it till you make it, or the perception of, you don't want to seem weak or vulnerable. And I get that there's certain things about, positioning and marketing and selling, as long as it's done with integrity and not fraudulently or, disingenuously. Yeah, at the same time, I think, people respect that when you're trying that they don't expect any one person's going to know everything, right? You have to be prepared for, and you should have before a meeting had some sense of what the expectation or topic is that coming into, although sometimes we get pulled into stuff. That's the nature of life. And yeah, so I think that there's a lot to be said for, being able to ask questions and pull other people in and create, like think about morale too. Who's going to respond? How does somebody feel if they, if something is like, oh, you should do this, and then it blows up, or they're yelled at or exercised in front of everybody else because they made a mistake. How many other people are going to want to share when they've, made a mistake? And I think senior people often forget that their words matter more at that stage than they did over all the other years. And that even a side comment or something jokingly, or that they didn't mean, or that, was ill considered, will be taken not only at face value, oftentimes might be run on and executed, or taken in terms of tone. So yeah, I think that's really a big one too, is, being aware in a way that I intentionally don't attend certain team meetings because I know by being there, I'm going to change the dynamic. And I ask my team leads, when is it appropriate and welcome, and how should we best do this? Because everybody's different, including the people that work for us, just like our family members, right? The same approach doesn't work for everyone.
Absolutely. I think that words matter. I've lived by the concept that the pen is mightier than the sword. And, at the end of the day, the words influence, how you think, how you speak, how you interpret, and what's said isn't always what's heard. Mm-hmm. Right. And there is that bridge of dynamic that sometimes, despite best case scenario, you cannot cross it. Right. Mm-hmm. But, being a leader and being in charge mm-hmm. of teams, being very conscientious that person may take that very critically. I've also been on the receiving end of it, where I had scream at me in a global team meeting. Mm-hmm. Call me some names. Mm-hmm.
Were any of them Tiffany or Hart?
And like afterwards, somebody said, like, why don't you speak in meetings anymore? And I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Because this is how what I now am been trained that this is what I'm going to receive. With that in mind, I'm also thinking that it's been said that one of the keys to overcoming challenges is resilience, right? Can you share a time where your resilience was tested and how you navigated that period, and any type of words that you can give of encouragement.
Yeah. I mean, I think about in my career too, there are these times when you're kind of moving along on a track and then it's like there was a bigger change. I like to talk too. I think we talked about this at one point, using extreme examples, because I think it helps tease out and make it even more apparent what we're getting at. So like in life, if you never get challenged or stretched and you're in the comfort zone, you never really grow, you never progress. At the other extreme, you can't be, facing resilience all the time. That like when you step outside in our DNA, you can't be afraid a tree is going to kill you. At some point, you got to normalize, hey, it's just a tree, right? Although if it falls on you, I guess it could kill you. So don't freak out when you see a tree tonight. We build muscle through resilience and resistance. And that's the trick is like, some people naturally, maybe it's less frequent. That's probably in our DNA because our bodies don't want to be stressed out every time, worrying and change is hard. At the other extreme, especially startup people, you're in a constant environment. But if too much stretch tears muscle, too little, you're not kind of building it. And at different points in life, like it may optimize differently. When you have, family or kids, you may need to like slow down a little bit the pace of change or adversity, or there may be periods when you're all in 24/7. For me, the resilience, I mean, even in my career and going from earlier career was consulting. I went to business school, then I worked for, in a lot of different roles in S&P Global, and constantly changing. And that took, becoming a beginner, taking all my experience and wisdom, but being in a completely new context. I went from working in investor relations and drafting remarks for the CEO and CFO, around earnings and speeches to shareholders. And then I was in Standard & Poor's in Japan, where I hadn't been in, in syndicated loan markets, different cultures, working Asia Pacific from Tokyo. And then I came back to our K-12 education businesses, and my mom was an educator. I'm like, hey, this is going to be awesome. Like they're like little kittens and puppies on like, how hard can it be? But because you had so many people in a good way that were so passionate about their purpose for the children, everything can't be a Rolls Royce in, let's say, educational content, even if it's for the children or you go bankrupt. And so like that actually, out of all the businesses when I was there, the education was one of the hardest where, I'm working and there are people well-intentioned. And I uncovered unintentionally the person who was leading a program that never got the rights for something that was going to be already printed in textbooks in the biggest state of Texas at that point in time, where we were threatened to be sued by the right holder because he hadn't put the paper in, and was like a 50 million, this is years ago, exposure for a publicly held company. And to kind of dig in, and I fell asleep in my chair one night overnight when I came onto it because I felt the urgency. I didn't have a wife. I didn't have kids at the time. Yep. But, those types of things, the CFO, and then doing it in a way where here's this wonderful man who had good intentions, who's older, and I don't want him to lose his job. And he didn't do it on purpose, but how do we put structure and process? How do we fix the urgent situation? My career now in recent years, and going from, JD Power to then working with private equity after helping the company get sold, being on my own, getting to Microsoft and being one of their global execs, going to a startup. And each one of those steps wasn't exactly the right long-term fit. As much as I was maybe on the outside, in these great, places, I was a beginner. I was like that whole holy fucking shit, like, imposter syndrome.
Drinking from the fire hose, as we like to say.
Yeah. It hurts and you don't get water, right? That's the punchline. But I knew that they were in directions of my passion. I knew they were both going to contribute value, and I was going to learn. I hoped that at each step, I always said, well, maybe this is something that could be the next 10, 15 years. But I felt like they were, earlier it was like moving away from stuff I didn't like and trying different things, then gravitating more towards the cultures and the things I knew directionally I did while still experimenting. And then trying to build these things in directions to the point now where I've got a very refined sense of what makes me happy personally, professionally. And yet I'm still going to evolve. So going from, to Microsoft, to the startup, to now Forbes Travel Guide, for me, each of those were like big steps. And in my personal life too, I've never been happier, reconnected with the love of my life later in life. I never got married until I got back together with Jennifer. And simply because it's the happiest days of my life doesn't mean it's without investment of time or challenge or life's a straight line. That's not, true. Again, like we teach our kids, you're going to fall off the bike, you're going to scrape your knee. So that's where I think all the things professionally and personally, the cumulative knowledge and wisdom that Chip talks about with Modern Elder really has come back at this age and stage of life. And there's a great quote, I think Chip has given it great visibility by a gentleman by the name of Davis Scott. That is, it's basically three pieces that I want to make sure I get it right so I don't F it up. The purpose of life is to discover your gift. The purpose of life is to discover your gift. The work of life is to develop it. So the work of life is to develop it. And the meaning of life is to give it away. And so I feel like, I figured out my gifts. I've had chance over the decades to develop, and I'm going to continue lifelong to develop. But I feel like I've been at the place now where I get the greatest gratification of being able, within our company, with our clients, with the initiatives, outside of it, supporting others, being part. Thank you for this opportunity to share. And my expertise in my life may, be relevant. There may be, if you walk away with like 2 or 3 things that help you incrementally have a better professional, personal life, that's time well invested. If it sets you back, again, our company covers 6 weeks of therapy after listening to this. I mean, after that, you're on your own. Tiffany knows that. So,
some of the greatest, I think, skill set, at least, for myself, at least, to get this far is that concept of resilience, tenacity, and grit, right? But even there, you can't just bash away at a wall, right? And so one of my most unpopular, statements that I say to younger women and even, those that are my peers and even seniors is, as a woman, you can have it all. You just can't have it all at the same time. It's constantly going to be a teeter-totter juggling act. When my career is doing well, it means my family's not being taken care of. That means I missed a kid's play. I missed, an important event. I came late with like a gift card to a birthday party, whatever it may be, because I'm really focused and driven on that. Inversely, somebody gets sick or something happens, or this is really like important to that person emotionally, then that means not that I'm going to fail at my job, but just that I will do the bare minimum to coast by. There's going to be no extraordinary measures here. Like you said, the careers that I've chosen, also, we're not saving lives. Nobody's going to die if I don't get that email report, whatever it may be, out the door, just right there. But those type of, like you said, stretch, grow, pause, reflect, I think moments where you build that next step of sometimes things that you don't like, which I think are just as important as knowing what you do like, because sometimes that leads you down the path of something even greater. But as you build that stair set, it's not immobile, right? It's not stationary. You build those steps to eventually, as you said, finding out what you like, learning where you're going, and then you can move that stair set to something else. Those type of skills transition, to other platforms. And I think that people sometimes get caught up in that, well, I have this many years doing this just one thing. I was like, yes, but those skills are transferable. And that's kind of like a challenge, but being resilient and being like, sometimes you might have to start one peg down from where you are to get to where you want to go. And that's also very unpopular. Nobody wants to give up something they feel they're entitled to.
There's so many things. I'll start with, kind of the funnier one, and then work my way backwards. The notion of like something you've always done or staying in patterns or things like that. And, like I used to joke in my single days, like, do you know what, all my past failed relationships, girlfriends all had in common? And somebody said, no, what was it? Do you have like a pattern, a type that you keep dating? I was like, no, the one thing they all have in common is me, right? In the failed relationships. And thinking about that, like that's true, right? It's incumbent on us. I think I love what you said about the teeter-totter. For me, the only time like my personal and professional life have been in perfect balance is when they've been passing each other and one's going to shit while the other's going up, right? And it's lumpy and it's inconsistent. And then there are days when you get peak on peak demand. So in manufacturing, it's like when everything's going out at the same time, like you have this huge surge, and then normally you might be at a much lower run rate. Right. But suddenly there are days, I have them today now where, like, I don't mean today specifically, although I should ask my wife, maybe I am having one of those days. I don't know. But, where you're like, oh, like, man, I'm failing my team. I didn't quite I dropped the ball on something, or, like the kids are having some challenges, and miscommunication in my personal life. And I didn't get to the gym, and you just feel like in trying to do everything, you just failed at everything at the same time. Like, we all have that. And some of that's also learning over time to prioritize, to for a period of time, having a sense of saying no to things and learning to be able to do that in a gracious way, or not now, or say, and being aware of what that hierarchy is. And it changes every day, every week. There are days where it's like, you know what, something happens in the personal side, everything else is going to drop. And you got to be prepared for that, even if it's not in your plan. The famous Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the chin, right? So, life is going to be like that at every age. And talk about it, it's not just women, it's everybody, but in particular, you can't be in Paris and, the boardroom, striking some global deal to give you, an extreme, and at your kids, ballet or soccer game or whatever it is. And FaceTime helps. But, for myself, when I travel, I talk with my wife. I think communication is so key, professionally and personally. Even with my team members. So Amy is somebody that oversees our client success in other areas. And we have Chessa, who's wonderful, who leads client success directly for Amy. And Amy has certain hours to pick up. And she and her partner, they have certain schedules. And I ask my team, tell me, what are the times a day that are really hard for you? When's it easier? So I don't schedule our team meetings or one-on-ones. And what Amy needs and prioritizes, or the style of communication that's effective, is different than someone else. So I think, as we think about ourselves, I mentioned family members, think about your siblings, your parents. If you took one approach, their personalities are probably very different. There may be similarities. It would utterly fail with the others, and vice versa. So we're all like that. And I think it doesn't mean you as the leader have to bend or be so pliant that you can't have your vision or needs or things like that. And but where you can give and where you can show people that you're understanding them and showing that you're helping them balance their personal and private life, I think that's huge. I think that is about earning, the right and the trust and the respect that when the chips are down, or, things are tough, people want to work. To your point about the person that yelled at you, I can't believe anybody in your shoes would then say, not only do they want to not only speak up, are they going to go back to their office and feel like doing their best work? Are they going to feel inspired? David Chang, famous chef, Momofuku, talked about how, especially and this is true in some parts of hospitality and restaurants, there's kind of leading from darkness, this yes chef culture that the Bear kind of popularized or mainstream. And he learned over time to lead and learn from light. And I see generationally a shift towards that, towards better balance of humanity and what matters, and things like sleep hygiene, health, instead of just being I did 100-hour weeks, you need to too, even if it makes you less good at your job and less good in your life because you're hangry and angry and lashing out. So
absolutely, I'm a big proponent of life is what happens while you're busy making other plans, right? And I think the shift is coming. Everybody I know is very excited about this, what is it, Gen Z or whatever that's coming down the pipeline, because they're like, absolutely not. I was just talking to a Zennial the other day, and mother was like, oh, you should go for the manager position. And she was like, no. She's like, I've done it and I've hated it and I don't want to do it again. I'm happy where I'm at. That drive to, climb the corporate ladder. She's like, it comes with less sleep, more work, less pay, less mental health for myself, and less life. And I think the Europeans really have it right, which is, they work to live, right?
Yeah. I think
not live to work.
Yeah, I love that. I think it also aligns to your purpose. Not every job's going to have drudgery, right? Even with Gen AI, hopefully, there's all shit that none of us likes to do. I do a weekly ops report. It's not the most glamorous or fun part of my job, but it plays a critical role in my understanding. I've gotten to the point where I have a very Zen way of doing it while, that works for me and minimizes the feeling. The question is like in almost every environment, if there are things that you enjoy, human connection, like some are completely incongruent with that. When you wake up and you have more fear or dread, or you stop being excited, it's time to start looking and saying, and I understand, I'm not saying like people still need, there's that hierarchy of paycheck, it's a job, it's a career, it's a calling, and we all want to get to it. But along the way, like a lot of my jobs were part of my career. They weren't callings, but I always found a way, like to your point about mindset and resilience and how you think about things. I always found the things within it that like aligned to the things I was passionate about. And I learned over time which ones and which areas were more central to that. And when it stopped earlier, it was harder for me. I just kind of went with inertia because like, hey, it's easier than making a change. And yeah, I'm not sure what I want to do next. So why would I want to jump? But like, as you get older, hopefully, if you're learning and applying, you do that more. I want to ask you, and I wanted to ask you this earlier, but I think it's a good point to put you in the guest seat. And you shouldn't call me Tiffany Hart or any of the other things that person yelled at you. But
yes, chef.
Yeah, thank you. Because you've gone through like real resilience, real overcoming. What I would say is objectively, neutrally would be much harder hardships, right? You lived out of your car for a while, like, and to achieve what you have, not only overcoming it, but to where you went. So tell us, because I want to learn this, and I imagine your listeners do, give us an example of like at the worst of it, like in that living in the car, the resilience. And then what are the things when like, okay, you probably got to a point where you're like, I could be like, not this is enough, because there's always more, but like, what was it that was like the resilience of the things that you wanted that got you to Harvard or got you in these other areas, not from an ego or like, look at me world, but like the things that like drove you beyond just kind of saying like, okay, now I'm living in a place where I've got a roof and food?
Yeah. Wow. Great question. Totally unprepared for it, of course. The darkest days, living out of the car at the time, I had my son, oldest son. And so there wasn't a moment, just like, many women and families and people that have come before us, to really stop and, contemplate like this is a low point in life. This, tragic. I just had to keep moving. Mm-hmm. There's a statement that, when going through hell, don't take up residency. Right?
I like that.
Keep walking.
Can you say that again?
When you're going through hell, don't take up residency. Don't go looking for the real estate. Okay.
And the last part, keep walking.
Keep walking. You'll get out of the neighborhood. Any neighborhood you're in, whatever situation you're in, as long as you keep going, it doesn't even have to be in a particular direction, but as long as you keep going, you will eventually emerge on the other side, and hopefully not to a cliff. Most successful moments, like even for, my undergrad, when I was going through school, at that point, I wanted to be a doctor. And, like I said, coming from low income, nobody's graduated from high school in my family, and let alone, college. Right. And so when I was, talking to my college counselor, I said, I really want to be a doctor. I was taking all these AP classes. I was graduating at like 16 years old from high school. And I was like, I need all of these, free application waivers. And she was like, I'll give you 2, and you should probably try for a state school, and you should probably go to be a nurse, because you're not going to make it to be a doctor.
To like lower your expectations.
Lower your expectations, right? Why are you being so ambitious?
Do you think it stuff like that comes from a place of love, of like not wanting to knock you down, but not wanting out of love, not like fearing that that if you fall short, it's like you're gonna like, it's better to lower the bar of expectations, and like, or was it like, tell me, because a lot of people have that. I want like to understand, most times people come from a good place. There's some people that don't, right?
Yeah, this particular one, not so much, but like my grandmother. So what is it? So, back to the story. So how did this end? She got called out of the office, and I stole the applications off of her desk and applied to the schools that I wanted to. And at the time, I did kind of take what she said into jest. And I got into University of California, Santa Barbara. And that was really great. And, my grandmother was helping me out at that time, because I had a family circumstance that I didn't have a place to stay, and she took me in, and I was like, Grandma, can you do me a favor? I borrow $50 for the deposit for college, and can you put a stamp on this? Right. So it was my, paperwork going back saying I was accepting admissions. Now I was about $20K short, but I was like, I got all summer to try to figure this out. I will make it happen.
Yeah.
My grandmother, from a very loving place, didn't want me going that far away so young at 16 to college. And she wanted me to be closer to home. And she didn't want me to take on huge loans and debt and stuff like that. So she never mailed that paper out and never told me until I got the notice coming back saying, we never received your intent to register. So we've dropped you.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And by that point, it was too late to respond to any of my second tier schools to say that, yeah, I would take registration there. So that I think that hurt the most, because the things that hurt the most usually come from the people that you love the most as well. Right. But things like Harvard and even going to Pitzer, basically my motto is like, fuck it. What are they going to say? No. Worst case scenario, I'm no worse off than I am right now. And the new kids call it YOLO. Right.
Yeah. They might be.
But honestly,
that's
it.
Yeah. They might be YOLOing though, like whatever money they have into margin calls on crypto. So like your YOLO and there might be a little different. I think yours is you only live once in a good way. Theirs is like a little reckless, that gambling. But yeah, I feel you. So tell us too, like, so you got, do you remember a time when that mindset changed, when something challenged you and your inner essence or with it, where you're like, no, like, was it out of, rebellion, or, you tell me I can't, F you, I like, at what age, like, did you have to keep cultivating that? Like, were there times, because you must have at times, all of us were human, like during COVID, when you just like, oh my God, the world, like how do you, when you do confront that, when you do have those moments, what is it that like got you on the other side?
Another thing that I really live by is one day we're all going to be, plant food. Okay. We're all going to return to the great circle of life. And thinking about that, those last days, hopefully when I'm nice and old and will die in my sleep, preferably, that I would rather regret doing something that failed, was the Hindenburg on top of the Titanic, was Ocean's Gate, style failure, than to regret have never done it.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you, I haven't regretted doing something. Even if it was bad, it was a learning experience, right? It's either a lesson, or an experience, but it's going to be one of those two for the most part. I haven't changed that mindset. I still have very much still that mindset, even though, clearly I have a roof over my head, life is good and I'm doing successful by any stretch of the measure for my family and for most people in the United States. I still have that, I guess, that grit, right? That just basically says, go out and try it. I mean, tomorrow I might write to Oprah. I don't know. I could do it. What's the worst can happen? I don't get any response. I'm no worse off, but at least I could say I wrote to Oprah. I did that.
So plant food. So the tree is trying to kill me now. Like the
absolutely.
Yeah,
he every time the leaf falls, he's sampling you for later.
I was going to say the pine trees, they're okay, but that elm tree is shady as fuck. So
no, the pine tree is also shady because it craps on your car. All that sap and stuff like that. When everybody gets like the allergies, it's just basically tree jizz in your eyeballs. Just letting you know that. Yeah. Good stuff. Talking about this, you've also been a strong advocate for diversity and inclusion within the corporate world. You talked a little bit about what drives this commitment, but how do you implement these values in your leadership style?
Yeah, I'll start with the foundation, which is there's a moral, ethical, premise of, if we're intellectually honest, if we look about, business culture has largely historically been led by people that look like me, that are, white male. Does anybody honestly believe if like historically it was all women that we wouldn't have better child care policies, that there, might not be fewer outings that are, at sports bars? And there are plenty of women that are into sports. So I'm not, trying to suggest this isn't the case, but areas, where, traditionally, and the same is true whether it's, African Black Americans, Latinx, other groups, if they were kind of historically the dominant business culture. And so if I recognize that, and when I look at the data, I talked about, in startups as examples, or you look at women's comp and everything else, that, until the data says otherwise, like, I feel moral, ethically. I have two sisters, just as bright, if not, brighter than me. Hand-me-down clothes were a little tough. Pink wasn't my color. I didn't have the legs to carry off the skirts, to be honest. I probably still don't. But,
I've seen you in pink, sir. You look great.
Thanks. I'll have to, next pod we'll go pink. But yeah, it's the kind of thing where, I think over time, I feel while I'm in a role where I have the ability, I see sometimes people wait till they retire. And a lot of times it's important in the public ways. It's important when women are in the room in our own company to have help advance women, to bring their comp in line, to when we have board meetings and somebody isn't there, to recognize them, to get them in board meetings when we come in. Our leadership we're Forbes Travel Guide, we're 50% plus women led at an executive level. And if you go down to like director and above, it's closer to 65. I'm very proud of our annual event. I played a role with Amanda Frazier, independent president of ratings, in doing this along with our CEO, Herman, and his leadership. We had speakers were 50% female and over a third were diverse in non-gender terms, whether that was, different cultural, ethnic makeups, color, people that are, different sexual orientation, et cetera. And so, I feel like there's a moral and ethical one. There's a famous quote by a woman, not a man, a woman, who said, right, that talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And does anyone believe that if I lived in, let's say, a developing economy far from cities, or where, I'd have the opportunities I did growing up, or where I had incumbent type of advantages or privilege, depending on your term, right, that I would have wound up in the same place, and you can say, like the number of people I think that overcome all types and the amount of adversity that is so much more than most of us face in our lifetime early on, the odds are further against folks. That's why I think you sharing that is so valuable for everybody, but particularly people that may feel they're, in that way. And I feel like, again, if we're being intellectually honest, the challenge I find, and there are active efforts to undermine DEI intentionally. DEI wasn't perfect in my mind either. There are things that I think could change, and everybody has different opinions of what they may be. But the notion of you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I feel like we need to flip the script. I feel like when it comes to getting attention, and this is true for ESG areas, you need to lead with the economics, the ROI. And there is a Harvard Business School. Would we agree Harvard Business School pretty reputable?
I would think so.
Right. Okay. And
no, it's slightly dodgy. It's slightly dodgy. No.
Yeah.
I went there, so it can't be that great.
So two HBS professors and another, Harvard Business colleague did a study, and there have been multiple ones. There's other ones from Harvard Business School before, and other empirical ones that show, yes, teams with all like white dudes who look like me perform well, right? The thing is that when you include different elements of diversity, whether it's gender, age, ethnic makeup, etc., which brings different perspectives. If we're all agreeing, because we have we have customers, we have stakeholders, we have constituents that are very diverse, right? But the teams that are more diverse significantly outperform by 10, 15%. And so my premise is, and predicate, especially for CEOs, if you were to ask any CEO and say, if there was something you could do that's in your control that would lead to more revenue, happier clients, happier staff, and happier stakeholders, and be a win for everybody around, would you not do it? Of course, 100 times out of 100 people would say yes. And yet, my premise is there are a lot of leaders where the teams aren't as diverse, and we're not perfect. We're still working on ours, but we pretty well, where if you are not, actively increasing diversity, in your organization, you are failing in your fiduciary responsibility. Let me say it again. You are failing in your fiduciary responsibility as a CEO, as an executive, to your shareholders, to your employees, to everyone else, because you are not optimizing opportunity that's in your control to make your business better, more competitive, more profitable, to make your customers happier, etc. And so I feel like that kind of data, and yes, people can create studies to create, reasons why, I don't know, why smoking is good for you, right? Like they can put fake data, but ultimately truth, facts come out, like, laws of gravity apply. If you drop something, physics applies. Yep. And so I feel like that's a big part of it, should be it. And it makes sense to me. I mean, I think you look at, just like we talked about, no one person can kind of know everything. And our experiences in life, your experiences are going to inform a given topic in your knowledge of the world in ways I couldn't even conceive of, even if I wanted to, even if I spent the amount of time just by having you with a bunch of other white dudes being like, hey, I wonder what it's like if we, people that come from different, customer segments and different backgrounds, and you've lived that and know it. And it doesn't mean nothing's a monolith. So most of our businesses have different, subsections of customers, of clients, yep. And I think it's important that all of us, play a role and not take it for granted. I see a generation of women in hospitality, they're coming up and they haven't quite broken through the glass ceiling yet enough. However, simply seeing it doesn't mean taking it for granted, or it's not important every day to continue to advocate for not just women, but creating diversity. Again, for all the right reasons, morally, ethically, and if people aren't buying that, to then lead with the financial and the business imperative.
I'm a huge supporter of that. I wrote an article on LinkedIn about the backlash against DEI and, the repercussions for, additional revenue, profitability, and risk mitigation. And so, I just from a purely economical standpoint, it makes zero sense to not have that as a perspective that's in the rooms that make the decisions, that looks like your client base, that looks like your geographical base, that, if those are the people that you're serving, so that you can better understand it and, again, mitigate risk, right? And so thinking about that type of, thought process, I know you're a strong supporter of AI and technical innovation. And how can you see AI's impact and influence not only in the DEI, but also the ESG space in the corporate world?
Yeah, I mean, I think AI is problematic because historically, like legacy tech, right, it's reflecting kind of the people that put it together and the models. And so there are issues even with people of color and diverse backgrounds. There's a woman I had the pleasure through a friend of mine, Vaughn Davis, who's well-known hospitality and also technology guy, who's an amazing story. Take a look at him, Vaughn, and then Davis. He led some hotels in Hollywood that were eventually part of, Hyatt, and he's now done his own AI startup. He introduced me to somebody named XIE, and we were on a virtual panel together, both of them people of color, and which is an aside, not predicate there. And XIE had been Google's head of responsible AI for a period of time, and so I would encourage folks to follow her when it comes to AI, because this is I am not the foremost expert, but I know someone who, by the way, it was only about a month ago, I had CNBC on in the background somewhere, and I'm like, and it was one of the major kind of AI conferences, and lo and behold, who's being interviewed, but X, she's there. Yeah. And then recently with the issues that happened with, I don't want to use the company's names, but one of the major tech companies, which really, had one of its vendors do something that screwed the airlines and a whole lot of businesses, unfortunately, which just happens. She's there on CNBC during, prime time, speaking to these types of issues and what happened and why. And so I think there's a part of that there's a big gap, I think, still to be closed. And I think she would be, better able to address that. Look her up. She's spoken about it. I think also just overall, I look at some of the issues as being more macro that, whether tech or other areas, those are the AI specific to how it addresses diversity is a big issue. But when I look across things, I think it's this more, macro societal thing of, how do we create connections? That's what travel is about, right? Like we travel to expand our horizons, to see common humanity in different ways and to be challenged and grow. And you don't have to go overseas to see that. I'm from New Jersey. Just, go across the border or go through the bridge and tunnels from New York to New Jersey and you'll see it. Or the other way around for my folks from Jersey. So I think that a lot of it is about being curious. A lot of it's about being open in ways that are challenging. The hardest part is when we're not aware, and it's very common, again, in our DNA, so the tree doesn't kill us, to have natural affinity for people that look like us, come from similar backgrounds. And the science says the more detached you are from people, especially when it comes to socioeconomic, which I think is a bigger barrier, the less you're able to empathize. And I think my upbringing, I'm grateful that I continue to be kind of integrated and have people in my life of all different backgrounds socioeconomically, not because I'm superior in any way, but because it keeps it on my awareness in ways that I even now today, even as much as I fail to recognize stuff that I take for granted, right? That you wouldn't or other people wouldn't. And I feel that a big part is people being able to connect as human beings. Travel helps that in ways to see outside their own bubbles, regardless of what bubble you may live in. And that's why I also love travel. That experience going to Japan in my teens, that going to Wesleyan in a more diverse area, really was a proxy for trying to understand. And we may always disagree. There's some topics that you're never going to reconcile. But I think this is true too. We've gotten to a point where I think even language is injurious in ways to some that is equated with real physical or a much more, what most people would agree would be a much more severe infliction of harm. And I think the risk of that is it burns the bridges and leaves us stranded on these separate kind of isolated cliffs without language as the ability, even where somebody's well-intentioned and chooses the wrong word and offends somebody, to find a way to help them understand without foregoing the possibility that is so injurious that we can't try to create understanding or be able to do it. I'm not saying negating that something may not offend and hurt in any way. We also, I think sometimes there are certain terms, maybe we need to evolve language where the same term is used for something that would be on a relative scale. Most people, I think, would say from like 1 to 10. I don't mean benign to negate it, but like very less severe than something that would be so severe that everybody would say we probably shouldn't be using the same word in terms of offensiveness or in terms of injury or things. And so I hope that we can find a way to language and travel bridge those, because I feel like we have so much more in common with one another when we take the time to make eye contact and connect as individuals than the differences that seem on the surface to divide us, or that other people may have a vested political, financial, business model interest in dividing us on.
Absolutely. I think that we are more alike than we are different. And I totally agree with you around travel being one of those means of bridging understanding amongst people. Thinking about that, I have my Anthony Bourdain quote.
Oh.
As you move through life and this world, you change things slightly. You leave marks behind, however small. Mm-hmm. And in return, life and travel leaves marks on you.
I love
most of the time, those marks on your body or on your heart are beautiful. Oftentimes, though, they hurt. And that's kind of like the path forward, right?
That's part of life. And, you mentioned earlier regret. There's a guy, I think David Pink, who's the author, who actually is a visiting faculty member at Modern Elder Academy. In Hollywood, it's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Any actor connects with any other through 6 degrees. In hospitality, it's 3 degrees of Chip Conley. I've told him that. But David Pink, regret, I just remembered what you said earlier. We regret, I think it's 2 to 1 is the ratio of things we didn't do when we look back versus things we did and maybe fucked up. So if you're standing there looking ahead and saying, I'm going to fuck this up, you're probably twice as likely. And then, he and Chip have talked about, if you're, imagine yourself 10 years from now looking back, so for you, Tiffany, when you're 35, for me, when my hairline's a little older, but, what will you look back and regret not doing? And a lot of us have that, fear, and they're understandable. We might be in a certain place financially or with family. Nobody's saying throw caution to the wind and and YOLO and put,
Right. Yeah.
at risk. But it's a balance. The quotes on travel, I love these two by Pico Iyer, who happened, again, maybe modern elders on my mind today, but he happened to be the guest faculty member the week I went in Santa Fe. And I love these two quotes for him because I think they're also proxies for just us as people. We travel initially to lose ourselves, and we travel next to find ourselves. So I love that one. And then this is the second one, which I think gets to some of the things that you're talking about too. Traveling is, after all, the greatest adventure, but the adventure is always within. And that, in a lot of ways, we're traveling physically through this world, and without being too like woo-woo or, I'm not going to ask you to get a pair of Nikes with a swoosh and like come to my compound and hang out and dress all alike and join a cult. But if you think about it, we all experience life in our brain, in our perception, and how we choose to frame or look at the world. In hospitality, and this is true in life and other industries from my JD Power days, when you arrive, if you're treated well at reception, when you check in or you go to the restaurant and how somebody greets you, if they make you feel like welcome, like a family member, and really genuine, you feel like they're really happy to see you. They're not just, thanks for coming. When you get to the table, if like a fork's missing or something, or a light bulb's blown out in your room, it's an inconvenience, not a tragedy. Or, you don't really think of it that way. But when you're primed and you're treated poorly, emotionally not valued, you start seeing the problems, everywhere. And I think the lens on life but we have a choice in that, and we are traveling in life, in our brains, and how we experience life, how we integrate it, what we choose to focus on, how we, dust ourselves off. And I think in our own journeys, all of your listeners in their careers and their personal lives, each of us have different things that matter to us and different gifts. And the question is really, when you take away, I think, Tiffany, for me, this has become as like, I'm enjoying, I feel like I want to keep asking you questions. So and keep turning the tables on you as host, but the wisdom that you get in life is an internal journey, and we change over time. And I just feel that matters a lot. Like that mindset, some people call it a growth mindset, like, not being a victim, nobody's responsible, how you choose to move forward, the resilience you talked about is and when we travel physically and experience things, it's us growing internally, as people and who we are.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I was actually waiting for your Mark Twain quote, but you did not share it today.
I'm saving that for last. If we
all right. Well, then what is it? As we close, what is the final piece of advice you would give to someone who's facing adversity in their career?
Stay away from trees.
Clearly.
Stay away from trees. I think this too shall pass. Like, I always look back. So when I think about things, I think this is easy. Like we talk about AI, it's just a tool to augment you, right? That's my friend Gilad Berenstein. It's just a tool. And like I talk about hotels, like you went through the internet and you're like, I got a website. Why do I need an app? I got an app. Why do I need to be on Facebook? I got Facebook. Why do I be on Instagram? Why do I need a messaging app? There's somebody at the desk, right? So I think when you look back in your life and you look at how far you've already come and all the adversity you've come over and the hardest moments, and then the hardest decisions, that like the things that make you most proud and happiest and feel joyous in your life, whether it's a pastime, like in my case, like I told you, I sucked at climbing and I love it. And it's like one of these things that for me is like my Zen. It's like my church. It's my temple. It's where I kind of like go within myself and kind of, because you can only focus on what's in front of you or fall on your ass. Like I got to a point of confidence and joy from it. If you think about the things that give you the greatest joy, probably at the beginning you sucked at that, including your personal relationships. Like it probably wasn't easy and you had to put hard work in. So I feel like this too shall pass, but look in your past and know you've done it and let that fortify you and give you the courage and the confidence to know you'll figure it out. And here's the thing, Amazon, Jeff Bezos talk about two-way doors. We think, in life, it's a one-way door for a lot of things. We make a decision and then we can't come back. But most things, a job doesn't work out, a relationship doesn't, like, it's not really the end of the world, and it's okay. Kids probably should be a one-way door, in fairness. You probably don't want to put them up, But
I don't know. My mom said from an early age that she brought me into this world. She could take me out. So I'm not sure if she did already invent the two-way door on that one.
My parents keep offering to my wife to put me up for adoption if it'll help. But here's the quote I want to end with, and I really appreciate you bringing it up so that we did have a quick minute to get it in. This is a famous quote from Mark Twain. Most of us in the travel industry know it and love it, but those of your audience who probably many of whom are not in the travel, or most of them are. And this is the quote: "Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness, and many of our people need it sorely on these accounts. Broad, wholesome, charitable views of people and things cannot be acquired by vegetating in one little corner of the earth all one's lifetime." Oh, and he also wrote, "Stay the fuck away from trees." I don't know what that was.
That one right there. That was, take nothing else away. That's the one.
Sorry,
that's the one.
That was Confucius, and Confucius also said, "I didn't say all that shit they say I said." So those are good. I think that's the other.
I love it. Stuart, thank you so much for sharing your journey and insights with us today and our listeners. And thank you for joining Confluently. Be sure to follow us on confluently.com and stay connected for more inspiring episodes. Stuart, again, it's been enlightening and we appreciate it. What is it? Remember to subscribe, share, like, leave your review, help us grow. Your feedback really fuels this journey here together. Until next time, keep embracing your challenges and stay the fuck away from trees.
You heard it here first.